Have you ever heard of Ishmael, the first son of Abraham? He was born amidst intense family drama, carrying with him divine promises and human challenges. While many are familiar with the story of Isaac, the son of the promise, few know the journey of Ishmael, the son born from a hasty decision, but who was not forgotten by God. Imagine a boy growing up in the desert, dealing with the consequences of his parents' choices while facing rejection and seeking his place in the divine plan. Who was this young man who became the father of a great nation? What was his role in biblical history, and what can his life teach us about perseverance, faith, and God's care even in the face of abandonment? In this video, we will understand the story of Ishmael, a character often forgotten, but who offers us profound lessons about God's purpose for those who feel rejected. Stay until the end of this video and discover who Ishmael was in the Bible and why his story still resonates in hearts today. Ishmael was the firstborn son of Abraham, born from his union with Hagar, an Egyptian woman who served as a slave to Sarah, Abraham's wife. Ishmael's story is deeply connected to the cultural and spiritual context of the time, where descendants represented not only the continuity of the lineage, but also the fulfillment of divine promises and the preservation of a family's name and heritage. God had promised Abraham that he would be the father of a great nation, with descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the grains of sand on the seashore. Even though he was already of advanced age and his wife, Sarah, was barren, this promise seemed impossible in human eyes, considering their conditions. However, according to the customs of the time, it was socially acceptable for a barren wife to offer her servant to her husband as a way to produce heirs. The child born from this union would be considered legally the child of the legitimate wife. With this mindset, Sarah, in an attempt to help fulfill God's promise, offered her servant Hagar to Abraham. Hagar became pregnant, setting off a series of events that would mark the history not only of Abraham's family, but also of future generations. When Ishmael was born, Abraham was already 86 years old. The Bible shows that Abraham loved Ishmael deeply and even asked God for him to be the heir of the divine promise. However, when Ishmael was approximately 13 years old, God renewed his promise to Abraham, who was 99 years old at that time. God confirmed that Sarah, Abraham's wife, would be the one to give birth to the promised descendant. As a sign of the covenant, God commanded that all the men in Abraham's household be circumcised. Ishmael, who was 13 years old, was also circumcised. This moment symbolized the connection between God, Abraham, and his descendants, highlighting that the divine promise followed a greater plan. About 1 year later, Isaac, the son of Sarah and Abraham, was born. This birth brought even more conflicts between Sarah and Hagar, but the issues between them had already existed before Ishmael was born. When Hagar became pregnant, she began to despise Sarah, which, according to the customs of the time, was a serious offense. In those days, a fertile servant could never challenge or disrespect the barren wife of her master. If this happened, the special servant who had been chosen to bear an heir could lose her status and return to being treated as an ordinary servant. For this reason, Sarah felt justified in treating Hagar harshly because of her behavior. Hagar, fearful of Sarah, decided to flee to the desert. There, however, the angel of the Lord appeared to her and asked her to return to Abraham's household. It was during this encounter that the angel revealed that the son she was carrying should be named Ishmael, which means God hears, because the Lord had heard Hagar's suffering, Genesis chapter 16, verse 11. The conflicts between Sarah and Hagar reached their peak after Isaac was weaned. During the weaning celebration, Ishmael mocked Isaac, which deeply offended Sarah. She then asked Abraham to expel Hagar and Ishmael from their home, Genesis chapter 21. However, this decision went against the customs of the time. According to the rules of that era, Ishmael was considered a legitimate son not only of Abraham, but also of Sarah. since he had been born to Sarah's servant. In extreme situations, a son born of a servant could lose his position in the family, but he could never be expelled. This entire situation greatly saddened Abraham, but God spoke to him again, promising to take care of Ishmael, Hagar's son, and to ensure that he too would have a great lineage. The Bible does not explain exactly what led Sarah to request the expulsion of Ishmael and Hagar, but it seems that more than any specific action by Ishmael, Sarah saw him as a threat to the position of her son Isaac within the family. After being comforted by God, Abraham, though sorrowful, made the difficult decision to send Hagar and Ishmael away. He gave them bread and a waterskin, and they set out into the desert. The journey was not easy. The heat and lack of resources soon became unbearable, and at one point the water ran out, leaving Hagar and Ishmael in a desperate situation. Hagar, feeling that there was no more hope, placed Ishmael under a tree to shield him from the sun. Unable to bear watching her son potentially die, she moved away and sat at a distance, weeping bitterly. In that moment of despair, Hagar cried out to God, and her prayer was answered. The biblical text recounts that God heard the boy's cry and sent an angel to comfort Hagar. The angel assured her that God would make Ishmael into a great nation, renewing the promise made earlier. In response to Hagar and Ishmael's anguish, God opened Hagar's eyes, allowing her to see a nearby well of water. This providential act saved both their lives, strengthening them to continue their journey. This divine intervention not only met their immediate needs, but also symbolized God's ongoing care for Ishmael and his descendants. Ishmael and Hagar first settled in the wilderness of Beersheba, where he grew up and learned to survive in a challenging environment. Later they moved to the wilderness of Paran. Although Isaac was the sole heir of the divine promise made by God to Abraham, Ishmael, and Abraham's other children, born outside his marriage to Sarah, also received their share of material goods, as recorded in chapter 25 of Genesis. This demonstrates that Abraham, despite the circumstances that separated Ishmael from his daily life, ensured that he was blessed with resources and support. Along with Ishmael, the children of Keturah, Abraham's second wife, were also included among those who received material inheritance, reinforcing Abraham's role as a provider for all his descendants. While there had been past conflicts between Ishmael, Isaac, Hagar, and Sarah that caused much pain and separation in the family, the Bible does not mention disputes between Ishmael and Isaac in adulthood. On the contrary, the two are seen together in chapter 25 of Genesis, united to bury Abraham in the cave of Machpelah, where Sarah had also been buried earlier. This moment demonstrates a level of reconciliation and mutual respect, indicating that despite the initial tensions, Ishmael and Isaac were able to come together to honor their father's legacy. The Bible concludes Ishmael's story by stating that he became an excellent hunter, highly skilled with a bow and arrow. Hagar, his mother, chose an Egyptian wife for him, with whom he had 12 sons and 1 daughter. Later, as we read in chapters 28 and 36 of Genesis, we learn that his daughter married Esau, Isaac's son. The names of Ishmael's sons are listed in Genesis chapter 25, verses 13 through 15, and many of them are mentioned elsewhere in the Bible as leaders of important tribes of that time. Ishmael's descendants, known as the Ishmaelites, formed 12 tribes and lived in the southern desert, moving from place to place in mobile camps. In chapter 25 of Genesis, it is recorded that Ishmael lived 137 years before his death, but the Bible does not mention where he was buried. According to Muslim tradition, he was buried in Mecca. In the New Testament, Ishmael is significantly mentioned by the Apostle Paul in chapter 4 of the letter to the Galatians, where he uses the story of Ishmael and Isaac to teach profound spiritual truths. Paul describes Ishmael as the son of the slave woman, and Isaac as the son of the promise. transforming the biblical account into an allegory to illustrate the difference between living under the bondage of the law and experiencing the freedom of grace in Christ. Paul explains that Ishmael, born of Hagar, represents those who were born according to the flesh. This means he was the result of a human solution to try to fulfill God's promises without waiting for the timing or method determined by the Lord. On the other hand, Isaac, born of Sarah, symbolizes those who were born according to the Spirit, that is, those who are the direct result of the supernatural fulfillment of divine promises. Through this comparison, Paul emphasizes that Christians, like Isaac, are heirs of God's promise, enjoying freedom and a new life in Christ. He uses this allegory to confront legalistic religious groups who insisted on imposing the practice of Mosaic law on new converts, particularly circumcision. These legalists, according to Paul, were like Ishmael, seeking righteousness through human efforts rather than faith. Furthermore, Paul highlights that, just as Ishmael mocked Isaac at the weaning celebration, the children of the flesh often persecute the children of the Spirit. This reference underscores the ongoing conflict between those who rely on their works to achieve righteousness and those who depend solely on God's grace. Paul encourages Christians to reject the mentality of spiritual bondage represented by Ishmael and Hagar, and to embrace the full freedom that comes through Jesus Christ. Ishmael, though not the child of the promise made by God to Abraham, had a life marked by divine attention and care. From the moment of his birth, God showed his special interest in him, choosing his name even before he was born. The name Ishmael, which means God hears, was a reminder that the Lord saw and responded to the affliction of his mother Hagar in the wilderness. This choice reveals God's purpose for Ishmael, even though he was outside the primary covenant established with Isaac. God not only cared for Ishmael, but also destined him for greatness, promising that he would become the father of a great lineage. This promise was fulfilled impressively. Ishmael became the patriarch of 12 tribal clans, organized in a structure similar to that of Isaac's descendants. These 12 clans, described as princes in Genesis chapter 25, formed the core of the Ishmaelite tribes, which became an influential and numerous people. Just as God fulfilled his word to Abraham regarding Isaac, he was also faithful to his promise concerning Ishmael. Ishmael's character was described by God with traits that reflected the lifestyle of his descendants. He would be a strong, independent man, accustomed to challenges. God said that Ishmael would be like a wild donkey, Genesis chapter 16, verse 12, a symbol of freedom and resilience, living in conflict with his neighbors but maintaining his autonomy. This prophetic description highlights the nomadic and resilient life of his descendants, who adapted to the harsh conditions of the desert, becoming known for their skill with the bow and arrow and their ability to thrive in a hostile environment. Over time, Ishmael's descendants established important connections with other peoples, including the Midianites, who were also descendants of Abraham through his wife Keturah. In several biblical passages, the Ishmaelites and the Midianites are treated as practically the same people, showing how these lineages intertwined and formed cultural and commercial alliances. For example, in the account of Joseph being sold by his brothers, the traders who took him to Egypt are described as both Ishmaelites and Midianites, evidencing the close relationship between these groups. The Ishmaelites played a significant role in biblical history and in the development of the nations of the region. Although they were not the bearers of the divine covenant made with Abraham through Isaac, they were blessed with prosperity and influence, thus fulfilling God's plan for Ishmael. Today, the Arab people largely identify their lineage with Abraham, tracing this descent especially through Ishmael. This connection reinforces Ishmael's role as a significant patriarch, not only for the Israelites as part of biblical history, but also for various cultures and traditions that recognize Abraham as a central figure. Ishmael is often remembered as the ancestor of the Arab nations, whose people grew and prospered, fulfilling God's promise that he would be the father of a great and numerous lineage. Ishmael's story goes far beyond an individual biography. In contrast to Isaac, his half-brother, Ishmael's journey reflects profound aspects of God's redemptive work and the fulfillment of his sovereign purposes. Ishmael symbolizes what is achieved through human and natural efforts, while Isaac represents what is accomplished through the supernatural power of God. Ishmael was conceived naturally, the result of the union between Abraham and Hagar, a fertile woman. This union was motivated by Abraham and Sarah's desire to help fulfill God's promise, as Sarah, barren and advanced in age, did not believe it was possible to have a child. This decision revealed a human attempt to solve a spiritual problem, relying more on logic and the customs of the time than on faith in the divine promise. On the other hand, Isaac's birth was a completely supernatural event. It was the direct result of divine intervention, demonstrating God's power by enabling Sarah, barren and 90 years old, to conceive and give birth. This miracle confirmed God's faithfulness to his promises and evidence that when he makes a covenant, no human limitation can prevent him from fulfilling his words. This fundamental difference between Ishmael and Isaac reflects two distinct aspects of the human experience in relation to God's work: human effort and dependence on divine grace. Ishmael represents what humans can achieve through their own strength, while Isaac symbolizes what can only be accomplished through God's intervention. The narrative of Ishmael reminds us that even when human plans deviate from God's original purpose, he remains faithful and gracious. Ishmael was blessed, cared for, and destined for greatness, even outside the primary covenant. His story is a testament that God can bring meaning, purpose, and blessing even amid human limitations and imperfections. At the same time, Isaac's birth reaffirms that God's power goes beyond human capabilities, fulfilling promises in ways that defy any logic or natural circumstances. Thus, Ishmael and Isaac together reveal different facets of God's work and his greater plan of redemption for humanity. Now write in the comments if you learned something from Ishmael's story and share this teaching to bless the lives of more people. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. May God bless you.